Here is the proper professional bit starting now. Welcome to REEDSY Live. Hello and welcome to REEDSY Live, REEDSY'S ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. Thank you for joining us today for this 7th edition of our live editing sessions with REEDSY'S Head of Learning, Tom Bromley. We have a lot to get on with, so I think we'll get the show on the road. I may have let the cat out of the bag already, but my guest is... He's an author, he's a novelist, he's an editor, former publisher, he's a jazz musician, he's REEDSY'S Head of Learning, the creator of our How to Write a Novel course. Please welcome Tom Bromley. Tom, how you doing?
I'm very well. How are you, Martin?
Good. It's a nice sunny evening up in Edinburgh. How's it down in the West Country?
It's very pleasant, actually. It's been nice today, nice and sunny. Always slightly distracting for work, but it's a good, pleasant summer's day here.
It's going to be nice. I don't have to turn on any sort of artificial lights. It's going to be sunshine until I came home last night at 11 o'clock and there was still light in the air. So I can get behind that.
Yeah, that's Scotland for you. That's kind of long evenings. Very nice.
But Tom. So can you tell us what are we doing today?
So tonight we're doing one of our kind of live editing sessions. So this is a session that I run on the novel course as well. So what I do is I take the work of kind of 4 writers and try and go through that in a little bit of detail. And the sort of thinking behind doing it is when you partly to show you how a professional editor would look at a piece of work. But actually, I always think even if it's not your own work that's being edited, there's so much that you can take away and use for your own work. So that's part of the reason behind doing it. So it's not just a kind of lifting the curtain thing, but hopefully it's useful for everyone's writing as well.
Great. So I believe you've selected 4 of the samples that were submitted with an eye to getting a sort of range of styles and genres perhaps. Everyone who is watching, if you stick around to the end, there will also be a Q&A. We have a chance to pick Tom's brain, so do stick around for that. Should we get the show on the road? I'll bring up the thing we shared. And take it away. Let me know if you need anything.
Okay, go for the first one. So I should say with each of these, what I will do is I'll read the extracts out first, and then I will go through editorial. And the first piece I've chosen is by Sandrine, and this is from a book called Blood and Shadows. And as you can see, the genre is erotic, dark fantasy. And it begins as follows. Huff, huff, huff. Dee Dee ran, breath ragged, every step a battle. Dee Dee's breath tore through her lungs, but fear gave her no time to rest. She was marred with blood and ashes. The child's soft whimpers were muffled by her chest, her little hand clutching at the fabric of Dee Dee's tunic. Branches and thorns kept scratching and tearing at her skin. She ducked and weaved between the trees. She would not stop. She could not stop. Behind her, silence echoed through the forest, but she felt their rapid approach. She needed to run faster. The manor had been eerily silent. In Dee Dee's memory, this place was pulsing with quiet life, the rhythmic sweep of brooms across marble, the scent of cardamom bread rising in the ovens, the footsteps of servants moving with purpose, and the worms murmuring behind their masks. She remembered Amelia's soft voice giving instructions with that gentle authority that made people listen. Now only silence met her ears, ominous, foreboding. Her boots clicked loudly against the stone. Her heart pounded as her eyes darted across the corridor. No movement, no voices. No one was rushing to greet her, ask her how her trip was, or find out if she had returned from Tenebris with word from the council. She stepped forward, then froze. A smear of blood painted the base of the nearest column. Another step, and she saw the body. One of the outer worm, his head twisted at an unnatural angle, his sword half drawn from its sheath. Blood pooled beneath his mask like spilled ink. Dee Dee crouched beside him, pressing 2 fingers to the side of his throat, but already knowing the answer. Cold, no pulse. She stood slowly, her pulse loud in her ears now. This wasn't a raid, it was a massacre. A flicker of movement drew her attention, just a fragment of a curtain fluttering where it had been slashed open. She turned her body, shoulders low, eyes sweeping the room. No aura, no heat, but something had passed through here, fast and brutal. She crept forwards, breath tight in her chest. Her eyes landed on a blood trail, thin lines climbing the stairs and leading deeper towards the family wing. She recognized the pattern, a limp. Someone had been wounded and dragged themselves up that hallway. Her life in the Assassin's Guild taught her how to read a scene. Her hand shook as she reached out to touch a second body, the cook, face down in a pool of blood. Amelie, please be alive. She'd adjusted her grip on the satchel. It still carried the sealed response from the Guild Council. It didn't matter now. Her jaw clenched. She needed to hurry. She moved as quietly as falling ash, using the shadow step technique she had learned from an elite worm, vanishing deeper into the corridor. The metallic scent of blood was heavy in the air. The once pristine marble floor was now covered in crimson. Okay, this is a really arresting and kind of powerful opening, I think, to a fantasy novel. There's kind of lots of action. We're thrown straight into the scene and the scenario here. I think sometimes when I'm looking at beginnings of books, one of the questions I always ask is sort of why now? Why are we dropping the reader in at this particular point? And I think it's quite clear that we're bang in the middle of the scene, that there's stuff going on. There's kind of murder, there's people being killed, and Dee Dee obviously is kind of rushing and trying to escape. I'm going to talk about a few things in this section that I think could be tweaked a little bit and kind of brought out more. First, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the use of kind of short sentences and short paragraphs. Secondly, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of grounding the reader. Thirdly, a little bit about kind of body language, and finally, kind of use of kind of repetition. I'll begin with the kind of short sentences because I think that's the main kind of structural piece I want to talk about. And I say short sentences, actually, it's short paragraphs, which is more the key. And if you look about how the scene is set out, we've got very, very short kind of paragraphs here. So in that opening section here, we've only got one section that's a couple of kind of sentences long. And then as we go down into the second scene, it starts a little bit longer, but then this kind of break goes on again like this. It's very, very short as we go through. As a structural device, short paragraphs create pace. That's definitely true. So there is an argument for, in a scene like this, using them in that way. However, I would personally say that the strength of short paragraphs is for emphasis. And if you've got too many in quick succession, then firstly, you lose the capacity to have a moment of emphasis. So, for example, you might want to highlight that one, kind of no movement, no voices, or she stepped forward, then froze, or a smear of blood painted the base of the nearest column. By having so many in quick succession, that sort of sense of emphasis is lost. So I think personally, I would be looking a little bit more at kind of bunching some of the paragraphs together to create a little bit more of a kind of up and down kind of rhythm and kind of flow. I wouldn't lengthen the paragraphs particularly. I don't think you want kind of thick chunks of text for this kind of action scene, but I think I would personally look at kind of pooling them a little bit more. And then when you have the kind of the key lines, those will stand out in a little bit more detail. The second point I want to mention was this idea of kind of grounding the reader. And I think when you're starting with a piece of writing, one of the key things is to kind of help kind of set the scene and let the reader know exactly kind of where they are. And I think here at the start, I think it just is a little bit confusing to me. So we've got this beginning bit here where we've got kind of Dee Dee on the run, but we don't know kind of where she is. And it's only at the end of the third paragraph here where we know she's in kind of some kind of forest, where it says she ducks and weaves between the trees. It's only here that we know that she's got a child, clutched to her chest at this point. And I think both those details feel quite salient to me. And I think probably they want to be kind of higher up. And I think probably this opening section of her on the run and she's needing to run faster, I think personally, I think this could be expanded out and given in a little bit more detail than it is here at the moment. The second element, what I think is kind of slightly confusing, is then when we go back into the past here. So we've changed the tense. The manor had also been eerily silent. So this is when she's come back earlier. And then and then it is slightly confusing for me. I think I had to read it a couple of times. That this is what the manor's normally like. It's got all this detail of kind of noise and stuff going on here. And then I think this word now actually is slightly confusing, because then that sounds like we're in the present, whereas in fact we are in an earlier scene. So I think probably in terms of the balance, I would have a little bit more of this section at the start. As I say, make a little bit clearer at the beginning exactly what the details of the grounding are. Let the reader kind of settle in a little bit more, and then go back in time and make a little bit clearer, I think, that we've gone back in time in that section there. If I go into some of the words, I think the opening sentences are always kind of so important. And I think that beginning there, the huff, 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 doesn't quite do justice to the style and the flow and the feel. It feels a little bit too light. I mean, my immediate thing when I think of huff is like the kind of almost like the Three Little Pigs, or huff and I'll puff and I'll kind of blow your house down. So I don't think that's needed there, and I think it's quite clear that her breath is ragged, here in the sense that actually we've got this repetition of breath here. So possibly you don't need both of those there, but certainly I don't think you need that one there at the beginning. And I think probably that opening couple of sentences can be condensed into one. Every step a battle, but fear gave her no time to rest. I think probably you want one or other of those and one description of the breathing, and then getting into this kind of opening paragraph of detail here. Marred is a really interesting word. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about the importance of the use of verbs, and I think where possible you want verbs to be specific and you want verbs to be active where they can. Marred, I think, is a I think it's a sort of curious choice of verb here. I'm not quite sure how much blood and ashes are on her clothes, but I mean, marred is sort of generally means it's they're spoilt, which doesn't quite feel strong enough to me in terms of what is going on. So possibly even something like tarred or something might be kind of stronger, or it just needs a little bit. It's a nice idea, but it needs a little bit more. In terms of the just a slightly stronger verb choice there, I would say. We then go on into, we've got a couple of repetitions here. So the idea of soft here, as you see, the soft is kind of repeated there. So you put one or other of those there. And actually, if I go down to that line at the bottom, you then got this use of the word gentle as well, which is probably a little bit too kind of similar. So you probably want to kind of change one of those. There's some use of kind of repetition for effect. So this one here is good. I think she would not stop, she could not stop, but a little bit like the use of short paragraphs, I would try and use that sparingly for more effect. So we have a similar repetition in the next sentence here. Behind her, silence echoed through the forest, but she knew, she felt, she needed to run faster. And I think probably you want sort of one or other of those kind of repetitions for emphasis there. And actually either of them could work. This one works quite nicely. This one, in a sort of rule of three, builds to the end point quite nicely as well. So maybe that might be the kind of one to keep. And then we go back to the silence here. We've got this repetition of silent as well. So there's a little bit of kind of tweaking I think could be done in terms of just kind of tightening the language in places. But I have to say, I think it's a really, really powerful kind of beginning to the story. And I think, as some people have said on the chat, I would quite happily have read kind of much further as well. I think it's a really kind of strong start. And these are all kind of, tweaks you can do when you go back and edit. But Sandrine, I can see you're in the chat, and I hope those comments are useful in taking it further. But as I say, I really enjoyed and wish you the best of luck in taking your novel on from here.
Cool. All right. That's really nice. Like, I wouldn't have sort of pegged myself as someone who reads sort of dark erotic fantasies, but it was like a really nice tense start. And I guess, even within those genres, that you do need to sort of paint with all the colours in the palette and actually have a story. Shows me my prejudices. But well, before we go into the second one, let's have a talk about your House Writer novel course, the next cohort of which is starting on Monday. So if folks were to sign up for that, what can they sort of expect from the course?
Yeah, so the course is designed to help you kind of write a kind of full draft of sort of first draft of your novel. So the course is 15 weeks long. You get from me a kind of daily video lesson Monday to Friday, and then there's a bonus kind of weekend lesson with a panel of authors that we kind of interviewed. And each of those weeks is kind of themed on a different kind of writing topic. And the idea is that you will do a bit of learning each day, but also kind of write your book at the same time. And the sort of balance is there between the two. And then on top of that, we have our community site on Circle, where you can chat and share work with your fellow students. And I run kind of live sessions, some of which are kind of live editing, as they are today. Sometimes we have guest authors, and sometimes we have masterclasses too. So it's an aid. I mean, my normal pitch of the course is to think of it a little bit like sort of NaNoWriMo meets masterclass, if that makes sense. That's the theory behind the course, and we've been running it for a couple of years. And the majority of people who do the course do get through to the end of their scripts by the end of the course. So if you're someone who's thinking, I'd love to kind of write my book, but would like a little bit of support in helping you get there, then this would be an ideal place to try that out.
Yeah, it's really nice to see some of the students from some of the cohorts a year and a bit back are now putting their books out, and they're sort of finding the readers, hitting the marketplace, and yeah, it's really must be quite pleasing whenever you encounter your students in the wild.
Yeah. I had one the other day, and actually, she's just self-published a book, and actually in her note, one of the things that she pointed out that she found really useful were the live editing sessions. She said that she kind of learned a lot from them in terms of kind of voice and structure in particular, and she was one of the people who carried on coming and still kind of joined the kind of live editing sessions even after the course had finished. So yeah, it's always nice to see those books kind of reach fruition for sure.
And if you're interested in joining the class starting on Monday, you can get 20% off at checkout with the promo code June 2025. The link is down in the video description as well. Cool. Yeah, just over. Yeah. But before we move on to the next one, if you're enjoying this so far, please do remember to give the live stream a like and consider subscribing. I try to put out new content on YouTube a few times a week now. We have some big stuff and some small stuff and some fun content. So if you enjoy it, do consider giving us a follow. All right, shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's go on for the second one. We're gonna stick with fantasy for this one. We're going from erotic dark to epic for our second piece, and this is by Renee Helen. I'm not sure it's Renee or Helen, but that is the author here, and this piece is untitled. But again, we're at the beginning of the book, and this particular story starts as follows: Thief, traitor. The words echoed across the cold stone walls of the great hall. Almost screams of protest shot through the air like daggers, piercing any heart who heard them. She pulled on the sleeve of the king, crying out against the injustice. "There's been a mistake, my liege," she cried. "My husband would never betray your trust." "Enough, woman," King Karan commanded, pulling free of her grasp and raising his hands as if to strike. Lunette ran forward from where she stood with the other servants, preparing to shield her mistress. But the slap never came. Instead, he lowered his hand as Lunette reached her, sliding down to kneel in front of her. "Perhaps," the king continued, "the next time you decide to marry, you will wait for my approval to avoid such a bad match." The words fueled the fire within Lunette. Her eyes met Alma's. Tears were running down the lady's cheeks, pulling on Lunette's heart with a single question as their world was crumbling around them. What do we do? Lunette scanned the room, her mind racing for options. Owen knelt silently as the shackles were placed around his wrists. His head was bowed, letting his brown locks shield his eyes. As the guards started to haul Owen to his feet, a thought occurred, and Lunette shot to her feet. "Proof," she declared. Her voice squeaked slightly, but the words came out clearly enough. "You must present proof to a lord's family before you take him away. It is the law." The king turned to face her, his eyes darkening as they locked in on her. He scanned her body, her eyes lingering over over of simple linen dress. I think it's not quite right technically there. Lunette inwardly cursed at her stupidity. Do my eyes deceive me, or does a servant dare to address her king? She is my sister, Alma added behind her. As Owen's ward, she has every right. Lunette's blood ran cold, but it was too late to change course. She stood tall, praying to any god who would listen that a lie would be believed. A lady of Kirari, dressed as a servant, do you think me the fool? Of course not, my liege, Owen added, causing the king to pivot towards his prisoner. It is a punishment. Lady Lunette has a sharp tongue, which I am trying to break her of. We have put away her silks until she can learn to speak with better temperament. A sharp tongue, is it? The king turned back to Lunette. Yes, my liege, Lunette confirmed. It wasn't truly a lie. Her blunt honesty would be considered a great fault if she were a noble lady, but among the serving class it mattered little so long as it stayed in its place. Very well. The king snapped his fingers, and one of his entourage stepped forward and placed a small piece of parchment in his waiting hand. The king kept his eyes locked on Lunette as he held it out to her. Okay, another fantasy start, and I think another kind of strong beginning here. Again, I think that sense of kind of story and narrative comes out kind of very forcefully. We're thrown right in again with that sort of why-now question about why we're here, with these kind of accusations over kind of Owen and kind of what he's done. And I think there's a lot of drive and there's a lot of tension in the piece right from the start, which I kind of really, really like. I'm going to talk about a few things in this piece. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of characters looking. I'm going to talk a little bit about point of view. Again, a little bit about kind of setting and kind of giving the reader information. And if I've got time, I will talk about a little bit about familiar kind of phrases as well. I just want to mention before I start all that, just that I talked in Sandrine's piece about the use of very short paragraphs. Here, I think you can probably see the kind of the contrast in styles and feels, where you have this very short beginning at the start, single word paragraphs here. Then we have this kind of contrast, partly through the dialogue, with kind of longer sections and shorter sections, but it's a more mixed kind of flow, which makes for a richer texture. And then when we do have single word lines, like what do we do here, sort of single sentence lines, they do really kind of stand out in contrast of what is there around. So just in terms of the overall kind of feel, I think this feels a kind of smoother read in that kind of sense, that there's more interplay, I suppose, and there's more room to kind of mix the pace as the scene kind of goes back and forth. In terms of how the book begins, I think that the viewpoint is slightly unclear to start with, and actually as the scene goes on, we're from the point of view of Lunette, the servant here. But that is not clear kind of straight away. She's not mentioned here at the beginning here at all. And when she does come in, she sort of comes in, makes her entrance sort of halfway through a paragraph. And even then, it's not immediately clear that she is the viewpoint character. And probably it's only when we get to this kind of paragraph here, when we start to get into her thoughts, that we realise that kind of Lunette is the point of view character. And I think when you're setting a story out, particularly at the beginning, particularly in that opening chapter, you want to make that point of view as clear as possible, as quickly as possible. So I think probably, although this is a dramatic scene at the start, rather than having with kind of Alma screams of protests, we need kind of Lunette somewhere in the mix here from the start, I think, to kind of make clearer where this story is being set and kind of which being shown the kind of scene from. A little bit like the previous piece, I would have liked a little bit more detail in terms of kind of setting, both in terms of the characters and also the kind of the scene as well. We haven't got much in the way of detail about what is going on. We've got the cold stone walls of the Great Hall, and that's pretty much all we get actually kind of during the scene. And it's slightly unclear how many people are in there as we go through. There could be more use, I think, of the different senses in terms of the description as well. So there's certainly stuff there, I think, that could be brought out, improved a little bit as it goes through. Let's look at some of the language. So there's a kind of the wrong kind of through there. Shot and daggers. I wasn't quite sure that daggers get shot. So in terms of that as a description, that probably isn't quite the right kind of verb to use there. And then we have little bits of kind of repetition that I think should be ironed out. So we've got Alma here crying out against injustice, and then she cries there. She's pulling on the sleeve there, and then the king is kind of pulling on the grasp there. So that, I think, could be kind of tightened a little bit. There's a little bit of detail like that. And the other point I mentioned at the start, which I should go on to, is just where characters kind of look. So when you're describing action, when you're describing characters in the scene, the more you can make them active through the body language, the more movement you get in the scene. And when the detail is more about characters looking, then the danger is it feels a little bit more kind of static. So we've got quite a lot here as the scene goes on. So we have Lunette kind of scanning the room here, and then we have the king turn to face her, his eyes darkening as they lock onto her. Do my eyes deceive me? And if I flip over the page, we've then got, Owen Eddy calling the king to pivot towards the prisoner. King turned back to Lunette. The king kept his eyes locked on Lunette. There's quite a lot of the sort of the blocking of the scene, as you'd call it in drama, around the characters kind of looking at each other. So I would try and mix that up kind of a little bit more. The more kind of action you can get in there, the better. There's a question from Helena. I can see the chat saying, should each new quote be indented? It depends on the style, the house style of the piece. I think these are just how they're downloaded onto my screen. I think normally I would probably have them indented as a new line. Sort of moved in for kind of each new line, but it's not the end of the world. I think the way it's broken down, it's clear enough where each kind of paragraph begins. I think that's most of the things I wanted to say on there. I think the only other thing I've mentioned is just kind of the occasional kind of familiar phrase. So we have things like the world crumbling around them, the mind kind of racing for options, and then over the page up here we have too late to change course, the blood running cold, and there was one more as well, which I now can't see. But I think those kind of phrases, those sort of familiar phrases, they're sort of fine as kind of holding phrases, but generally I would try and look and see if you can find something just a little bit more distinct and a little bit more different to kind of replace those. I think that's part of the stuff of editing, actually. You've got the material set, you've got the story set, and then you're going in and working kind of line by line, trying to kind of improve the text. Verbs is one of the things you can do, and sort of rooting out kind of familiar phrases is another one. And it always sounds a kind of small detail, but the ripple effect it has on the book as you take those out does make a large difference. And I think with the quality of the writing here, I'm sure that the author has the capacity to improve that as necessary. But again, a really interesting, very kind of strong kind of story start to a piece of fantasy. And again, I would have happily read further to find out what was on this missing piece of parchment at the end.
It's quite interesting. If you just sort of fill your first draft with those familiar phrases, they almost become quite easy to identify, and it's like they're almost like little bookmarks for like, well, I'll come back later and sort of figure out, what the art of this should be. But I guess for a first draft to just like, maybe just put in a cliche if that's the first thing that comes to mind, just to sort of get that first draft through.
I think so. I mean, I will often use them in first drafts, almost as like kind of placeholders because on the first draft you want to get the narrative down. That's what you're trying to do, and actually to kind of stop and think, well, I don't want to use that familiar phrase. Can I come up with something else instead? You could quite easily spend 5 minutes doing that and lose all that kind of forward momentum you've got. So I think using them in the first draft, I often use adverbs. I talk quite a lot in the course about my dislike of adverbs, but I quite often use them again in first drafts because it's quick shorthand to get the scene down, and then when you've got the time, you can go back through and see what you can add in and change instead. And as I say, all those things, they're little things to alter, but they do make such a big difference to the quality of the writing as they filter through. So it's worth spending the time working on them.
Do you find yourself like when you're doing that thing and like you throw in an adverb there, with a verb that's like maybe 6 syllables, just to sort of get the rhythm of it, and then you sort of know when you're coming back, yeah, I kind of need something that sort of fits into this meter.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really useful when you're editing, and that's that's partly the reason why I'm doing the editing this way around here, is to read the text out loud. I think that is so useful, particularly in dialogue, but actually in the text more generally as well, to get a sense of the rhythm and the role and the feel of the sentences and the paragraphs, and you can see where the text is tripping you up as a reader, and see what needs kind of changing. But yeah, actually, that rhythm and that meter is so important to get right. And you want those words, you want the emphasis to land on the right words, and that's hard work. That's the stuff of editing. I think sometimes we say that good writing is actually about rewriting rather than writing, but it's the hours spent going back over a text. I interviewed an author on Monday night for the course, Claire Leslie Hall, who's had this huge book called Broken Country, which is at the moment kind of top 10 bestseller in the UK and in the US as well. And she was saying, I think she'd done 13 drafts of the book before it was kind of completed. And there was a long gestation in terms of how it changed. But, she was someone who kind of went back and back and back, until the text was right.
Yeah, when people talk about like, oh, I went through like 13 drafts, does that sometimes mean like you'll go through it, do a pass, and then sort of make small changes? Or do you think that sort of is reconstructing almost every chapter from the ground up? Or yeah, what to you is like the smallest unit of rewrite?
I think the smallest unit probably is where you are, I guess, all the, I sometimes use the phrase furniture, all the furniture is in place. So structurally, you're not changing anything. So then you're going back through and kind of tweaking line by line. So there's nothing structurally or character-wise you're changing in the piece, but you're just trying to bring it out. And I think some drafts are bigger than others. So a first draft is going to take you a while to write, and then every draft is kind of slightly different. I mean, thinking back to my first novel, I think I wrote 5 or 6 drafts over a number of years before it was right, and some of those were more substantial than others in terms of the kind of rewriting. But each time you go through the filter, it changes. It's an interesting process, and sometimes, and I think Claire was saying on Monday night, she would actually rewrite from the beginning again. So rather than go back and edit the piece, sometimes she would actually rewrite the scene, but with a kind of fresh eye.
Okay, yeah, that'd be sort of interesting. Yeah, I've done things before where it's like I just tried my best to remember how it was, and very often I find it's just like, oh, it becomes a bit more efficient because you realise, oh, there's a bunch of stuff you wrote that just wasn't important or was getting its own way.
Yeah, I'm old enough that when I first started writing, I used to write longhand and then type it up. And actually, that typing up was then like the second draft because you then edited it as you typed it in. It's quite a nice technique, but yeah, it's very kind of time consuming, which is why I don't do it anymore.
Nobody these days has the handwriting for it. All right, shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Let's do it.
So we're going on to history thriller for this next piece, which is by Carlton Gardner, and this is the beginning of a book called Shadow of Goliath. So we've got the prologue here, and then you'll see we just got the very beginning of chapter 1 as well. The year was 1962. A low, persistent dread hung over the nation. In city after city, familiar buildings, schools, post offices, libraries suddenly bore black and yellow signs. Fallout shelter, stark warnings of a world on edge. Inside these shelters, stacked in quiet corners beneath government basements, sat drums of water, boxes of dehydrated food, and basic medical supplies. Silent testaments to a country preparing for the worst. Across the nation, Americans braced themselves. Families built private bunkers in their basements and backyards. Classrooms echoed with the thud of children dropping beneath desks during duck and cover drills. Television screens crackled with the now routine broadcast. This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test. Outside, however, the air raid sirens screamed something far more urgent. Then came October, the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 harrowing days, the world hovered on the brink of nuclear war. Soviet missiles in Cuba, American warships forming a blockade, Kennedy's somber voice on every television, warning of possible annihilation. Newspapers blared doomsday headlines and grocery shelves emptied overnight. Church pews filled with silent prayers as pastors spoke not of heaven, but of blast radii and moral reckoning. Fathers paced living rooms with transistor radios pressed to their ears, tracking every movement of Soviet freighters inching towards Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis was more than a geopolitical standoff. It was a countdown, a nation collectively holding its breath. And yet, while all eyes turned outwards towards missile silos, Khrushchev's proclamations, Kennedy's televised warnings, something darker was stirring at home. A shadow, quiet and methodical, took root within American soil. Beneath the streets of New York City and other key American cities, an operation took shape, one aimed not at defence, but destruction. Hidden within the belly of the country, buried under concrete and steel, lay secrets so deeply embedded they remained untouched for decades. Chosen for their strategic importance, these sites became silent, invisible threats, coiled in darkness beneath the ordinary rhythms of daily life. When the Cuban Missile Crisis passed, the nation rejoiced with cautious relief. Teachers cancelled drills, newspapers turned to lighter fare, but the relief was premature. For the most dangerous weapons had not been fired. They had been planted, patiently, invisibly, and left to slumber beneath the very country they were meant to destroy. Waiting. Part 1, The Echoes of Leviathan, Chapter 1, The Whispering Wires. The Empire State Building groaned, a low metallic sigh that resonated through Parks McCormack's bones. He'd been chasing a phantom signal for 3 nights, a faint, intermittent hum that interfered with the building's antiquated phone system. They were relics, the old analog lines, a network of copper wires snaking through the building's labyrinthine interior, a vestige of a bygone era. His task? Find the source of the interference, a seemingly simple maintenance request that had spiraled into an obsession. He traced the signal, his handheld scanner chirping erratically, leading him deeper into the building's forgotten spaces. The air grew thick with the scent. Wow, this is a really kind of strong kind of beginning for a novel. Lots of things about this I like. I'll talk about the writing in a second. But one of the reasons I wanted to kind of select this piece was over this question of prologues. I think quite often on the course, one of the questions I get asked more than many actually is, should my novel have a prologue, and what should a prologue do? And I always think there's no right and wrong when it comes to kind of prologues. I know that some writers are very kind of set against them. I think for me, it depends on the particular story and what the demands of that story are. But what a prologue should be is it either should be a sort of an hors d'oeuvre, I sometimes describe it as. It's a little kind of taster for what lies ahead. So it's either a flashback or a flash forward before the story kind of properly begins. They shouldn't be kind of too long in length. They should add some air of mystery that then unfolds in the story proper. So on all those kind of criteria, I think this works kind of very, very effectively as the beginning to a piece. It's about the right length. It's set back in the past, and then we move on to the story proper several kind of decades later. And there's lots in here in the writing that I really, really like. I'll talk a little bit about paragraphs this evening. Here you can see that the paragraphs are all of a slightly kind of longer length, generally, which creates a kind of rhythm to it. And then it means that when we have that short single sentence paragraph at the end here, waiting, that really kind of stands out as a result from that rhythm that's kind of built up throughout the prologue. In terms of the scene as well, it's I think one of the challenges with it is it's got this very kind of wide sweep. So it's kind of America overall. We haven't got a particular character, and it's probably kind of broken down into 3 sections. So we have the start here, where this kind of general start about America in 1962 with these kind of fallout shelters, and this kind of general kind of setup and kind of practicing for kind of nuclear war. Then we move into a more specific moment. where we've got the Cuban Missile Crisis here that goes on for a bit. And then we've got this, which I think is a story bit about kind of what is happening kind of underneath in terms of what's being kind of left behind underneath New York and kind of other cities. I always think that kind of scenes work better than summary. So personally, I think that I would look at trying to begin the piece actually in the Cuban Missile Crisis. That is our moment and our scene. And these couple of paragraphs at the beginning, which are kind of beautifully written, as I'll talk about in a second, sort of set the scene rather than getting things going. So I think probably some of the detail in here could be included in the Cuban Missile Crisis, so we get us straight in there in a particular scene, a particular moment. So rather than being the year was 1962, we're beginning with October 1962, and then we're kind of straight in kind of with the action. So I would probably just kind of tweak it a little bit in that kind of way. I mentioned kind of verbs earlier on, and the verbs in this piece are fantastic. If we look in the second paragraph here, we've got braced, kind of built, echoed, crackled, dropping, the thud of children is all brilliant. And then when we have this paragraph here, there's lots of newspapers blaring, grocery stores emptied, fathers paced, transistor radios pressed, kind of tracking every movement of freighters inching towards Cuba. There's lots and lots of kind of movement in the piece that, although it's kind of got this general overall sweep, we've got this kind of action feel in it as well, which I kind of really, really like. And this is a good example of an author who knows how to kind of use their verb choice extremely well. Occasionally, and I think probably in this opening paragraph, it needs kind of thinning down a little bit. So if you look, we've got a couple of sentences here. We've got one here and then a second one here. If I just read these out again. In city after city, familiar buildings, schools, post offices, libraries, suddenly bore black and yellow signs, fallout shelter, stark warnings of a world on edge. I think generally, as a rule, if you've got two different kinds of punctuation in a sentence, there's probably a little bit too much going on. That's the first thing I would say. But just in the rhythm as I'm reading it, felt like there's too much information probably being given to the reader at once. And where it clicks into place, it's beautiful. Stark warnings of a world on edge. Kind of Martin was talking about the importance of kind of rhythm earlier on. And that's a good example of where it works extremely well. And you've got this kind of closing word there, on edge, to kind of finish the sentence, which works very effectively. That second sentence is a little bit similar. Inside these shelters, stacked in quiet corners beneath government basements, sat drums of water, boxes of dehydrated food and basic medical supplies, silent testaments to a country preparing for the worst. So I would again say here, the close of the sentence is fantastic. The middle bit here, I think there's just a little bit kind of too much kind of going on. So I would just thin that down just a little bit there. And if I move on just very briefly, because I'm aware that kind of time is ticking on, where we get into the scene proper here at the end, it's lovely. There's some really kind of nice writing here. We've got this use of the different senses, all this noise, the groaning, the low metallic, the metallic sigh. We've got this, the scanner chirping erratically. We've got the air growing thick with scent. And because we've had the prologue, we're quite intrigued about what he's going to go down and find. That's all set up very well. Again, there's really good verbs here. You've got a couple of words, snaking, I really like. And we just need probably a little bit more in terms of kind of Parks as an individual as he's going down. I'm sure that will come through in the scene. But I think this is a really strong start to a novel. And I think it sets, I think that prologue does set the scene up kind of extremely well. So there's a bit of tweaking to do with the writing, but there's so much in the writing I was impressed with, Carlton. And again, I wish you the best of luck in taking this on from here.
Fantastic. Well, we just have one more left in the tank. But if you're okay sticking around for just a couple of questions, Tom, if anyone just wants to put their questions in the comments around nowish, we can jump straight into that afterwards. But yeah. So what sort of, as the sort of terms have gone on, are you seeing there being any sort of trends or movements with students writing certain types of books or sort of focusing on certain topics, or is it always like a lovely mixed bag?
It's usually a mixed bag. I mean, I've taught novel writing for over a decade, and you tend to get people writing what is successful and kind of popular. So when I first started, books like The Hunger Games were kind of big. So I got a lot of kind of dystopian kind of YA going along, and then more recently I've had kind of cozy crime, I suppose, off the back of people like Richard Osman, kind of romantasy. So you do get those trends kind of filtering through, but generally it's quite wide and quite varied, which I always find are the most interesting kind of groups to teach. I've done it a couple of times where you've had a set group of people writing the same genre, and it gets a little bit samey. It's more interesting when everybody's writing kind of quite different stuff.
Nice. Great. Should we crack on with the last one?
Yep, let's go for the final one here.
Brilliant.
This is from the author. So this is a piece sent in by Nicole, and this is a book which I think is called Book Club, and she's marked this down as being women's contemporary fiction. And again, we're just in the prologue in this particular scene. We don't get on to chapter 1 in this particular section. Books, the best antidote against the marsh gas of boredom and vacuity. George Steiner. It takes less than a minute from when I first open my eyes for them to adjust to the dim light, but I do not recognize anything. I am lying face down, my body pressed flat, shoulders, breasts, abdomen, thighs, toes, all flush with the ground. My eyes move first, widening, then darting left and right. I feel stiff, and I try to adjust my position, shifting just slightly onto my elbows, lifting my chest. Incredibly, what I can only assume is a bullet flies past my left ear, ruffling my dark blonde curls with a breeze as it passes. I yelp and immediately flatten myself again, pressing my palms to the ground as well. The floor beneath me is solid and cold, concrete. The dim lighting illuminates my immediate surroundings, but mostly I'm surrounded by shadow. Another shot rings out, and I flinch. The noise is deafening. I don't dare make a movement large enough to call attention to myself, so I again shift only my eyes left and right without lifting or turning my head, this time gathering as much information as I can with my quick sweep. Tyres, both sides. I am between two parked cars, continuing to hold the rest of my body still. I take a deep breath and slowly crane my neck to the left. Several more cars aligned in a row confirm that must be in some kind of parking structure. I hear a squealing from my right, a screech that echoes around me. I jerk my head quickly in the direction of the sound while still straining to keep the rest of my body motionless. 2 more shots ring out from the opposite side of the parking garage. My vantage point is so limited that I am forced to peer under the chassis of the nearest car to see anything more than 6 inches from my body. But I find movement. It's a car and it's speeding in my direction. Shit! Some primal part of my brain kicks into gear and I scramble backwards, moving in a kind of low crocodile crawl, barely lifting myself above the floor. I stop behind the nearest car, a nondescript green sedan. 5 seconds later, the shooting picks up again. It's loud, and I can hear the bullets ricochet off of barriers and other vehicles. Flattening myself to the ground again, I cover my head with my arms. What the hell is going on? Suddenly, the tyres that were speeding in my direction come to a screeching halt, leaving several inches of black tread on the concrete and an odour of burning rubber that I can smell from 10 feet away. The car is small and dark, but I can't make out much more. The passenger door flies open. I freeze, my breath caught in my throat. Jill, for shit's sake, Jill, get in the car. Okay, so this is another kind of arresting kind of beginning to a story. I've talked a little bit about kind of paragraphs this evening. This is probably the piece actually where the paragraphs are the kind of longest, and I don't know if you can hear that as I'm reading, but it means that the pace is a little bit kind of slower. As a result, it's going through. Those longer paragraphs mean that when we get this sentence here, that absolutely kind of stands out. It does kind of really kind of become quite noticeable. I think possibly here that actually the paragraph's almost a little bit too long, given in terms of what's happening. So it might make sense to have it longer at the beginning, where this character Jill is kind of lying on the ground. But once the bullets and stuff are firing, I would be tempted actually to kind of break these up just a little bit. So then we've got a little bit more kind of pace in the scene, a little bit more kind of speed up. Not so much that when you want to get that line, what the hell is going on, that you are kind of losing that kind of difference and kind of contrast. But I think shortening them a little bit or mixing them up would add just a little bit more kind of pace to the mix. I'm always slightly wary with kind of books that begin with characters kind of coming to or kind of waking up. I think waking up generally is for me is something to be avoided. The danger with that is it can feel just a little bit kind of chronological, rather than kind of narrative driven. Here, I'm slightly unclear if the character's been asleep, if she's been unconscious, quite what is going on there. I mean, maybe, obviously it does say kind of what is going on, so it may be that actually kind of that is explained a little bit later on. But I just wonder about that as the very beginning. I would kind of mention. Then I think as we go through, I wanted to mention that this is in the present tense, and the feel that creates that makes the piece more immediate. That works well for this kind of scene. Probably there's a little bit of tightening to do in places here. So if we look at this second sentence here, I'm lying face down, my body pressed flat, shoulders, breasts, abdomens, thighs, toes, all flush to the ground. If we know the body's pressed flat, do we need this detail here, or can that come out? I think probably for me that can come out just to kind of speed things up a little bit. There's a lot of looking here, darting left and right. And again, in terms of grounding the reader, it's not immediately clear where we are. I get the sense that the character doesn't quite know where they are, but I think a little bit more detail where possible would be good to get across. I think that the use of the bullets needs to be done a little bit differently. So the first bullet is almost, so as I said, matter of fact, incredibly, what I can only assume is a bullet flies past my left ear. I think there's a far more dramatic way that you can that can be described. If you look at the second bullet here, where the other shot rings out and I flinch, the noise is deafening. That's more the response that we need, rather than this almost kind of more kind of thoughtful turn at the beginning. Incredibly, what I can only assume is a bullet kind of flying past the left ear. I think sounds are kind of really, really important. I mentioned that in the previous piece, use different senses, and that comes in kind of very, very well. It's still slightly unclear in the setting. I'm between two parked cars, and then we see here we're in some kind of parking structure. And then I think it's only a little bit later where we talk about sort of parking garage. So I think obviously it's quite difficult for the character in this situation to take in a lot of detail, but I still think a little bit more could be kind of brought in. But I like that sense of confusion. I like this sense of noise, the kind of the squealing of the car, the shots ringing out. The movement here, I think a little bit more of this where it comes in could be good. I love the scrambling, the kind of low crocodile crawl is really nice, barely lifting myself across the floor. A little bit more in terms of the kind of the senses and the feel here as well. So earlier on, she's flinching and she's yelping. There's a bit of a swear here, but she's kind of, I think, a little bit more in terms of feeling. I think would work extremely effectively. And actually, where we do get the different senses in it, it works so well. So here we've got the car coming to a screeching halt. 7-inch black tread on the concrete, and odor of burning rubber that I could smell from 10 feet away is great. Little bit of confusion here in terms of the car being small and dark, depending on where she is. And I just want to mention the swearing here at the end here. I think pause on that. I'm sure I should talk how much I should talk about swearing on a live thing, but for shit's sake, doesn't quite feel quite the right phrase. to use. It feels like it should be probably a different swear word in there, particularly because we had the word shit in before. There's a bit of repetition there, so I'd probably change that a little bit more than it is at the moment. But again, I think this is a nice kind of dynamic beginning to a novel as a prologue. It's certainly adding in that sense of mystery. We don't know what's going on. The character doesn't know what's going on. And I assume once the novel gets going properly, then all that will be kind of revealed in a bit more detail. But there's lots of good action there. As I say, I'll probably look a little bit at the length of the paragraphs, think a little bit about the structure in that kind of way, and bring out those moments with the bullets. I think those will be used as punctuation within the scene. But yeah, there's lots in here to kind of play with. Yeah, Nicole, I wish you the best of luck in taking your writing forwards from here.
Okay, fantastic. So if you're okay, we've got, I think, some folks sending in some questions. One here from Caitlin Truhella. What will you share in terms of advice or warning for new authors that want to pay the minimum for editing services? Maybe not out of sheer frugality, but perhaps either a caution or perhaps it's just not money they have available. Like, what would you say is the value in professional editing help, and what can they actually look for that may also be less expensive?
I think generally with editing, it sort of a little bit depends where you're at with the manuscript. So sometimes I get asked whether a book should be kind of professionally edited before it's taken on or sent to an agent or a publisher, and I don't think that's the case at all. I think that there's moments in the process where having professional edit can be quite useful, particularly if you're getting a kind of editorial assessment, say, or read on the script. But you can also get those from fellow writers. So quite often, if you're in a writing group, such as on the writing course, you can share work and have that sort of that swapping to get the feedback, and then you can get a lot of what an editor would say through getting 3 or 4 different kind of group reads. So I wouldn't feel that at this point in the writing process, when you're writing the book, you need to be spending money on editing. I think you can find that through kind of sharing work, but there may be times later on in the process where getting a more professional opinion could be useful, but it's not compulsory by any measure. And as I say, if you're thinking of sending stuff out, I wouldn't feel that you have to get the book professionally edited before you do that by any stretch.
When you were a publisher or acquiring books, were you a fiction as well as non-fiction?
I did a bit of both. It was mainly non-fiction, but I did do some fiction as well.
Yeah. So when, if an agent would be sending in a manuscript, what sort of level of completion, or so what state would they tend to be in by the time it went through the agent's hands and then into your inbox?
So if it's a fiction submission, it would be the full manuscript, and that would have been worked on by the agent or somebody in the agency. With a non-fiction proposal, you sometimes got the whole book, but usually what you'd get a sort of detailed kind of structure and synopsis and a few sample chapters. But certainly when you're writing novels at that point, the whole thing would have been done. But a good agency will work on the script with the author, and that's one of the reasons why I just put that note of caution about getting a professional editor, because they would rather see your work unfiltered so that they can, get their editorial opinion in there rather than reading it through a filter of what someone has edited in advance.
Just a reminder, whoops, not the right one there. Back in this box. Hello. Tom's course, the other way. Yep. The next cohort starts on Monday. This code will work until then. That'll get you 20% off June 2025. All the links are below there. I think there are no more questions. All the questions have been answered through your feedback, Tom. That's efficient work. I want to thank you for joining us, Tom, and for taking time out of your evening. To everyone who's watching live, thank you for spending an hour with us. I hope you found this enlightening, edifying experience. We'll have another one, no doubt, at some point. And make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Cheers. Good luck with your writing.